Hi everyone, welcome back to yet another exciting session of Law Wednesdays. Today we are going to talk about the Israel-Palestinian war from an international perspective. अब आपको पता होगा कि इस वक्त at this moment also that we are talking, there are hundreds and thousands of deaths happening both in Israel and Palestine, specifically the Gaza Strip. तो आपने इसके बारे में न्यूज़ में बहुत पढ़ा होगा, अगर नहीं पढ़ा है तो प्लीज़ जाके पढ़िए, बिकॉज नॉट जस्ट फ्रॉम द लीगल रीजनिंग पर्सपेक्टिव बट ये आपके करंट अफेयर्स के पर्सपेक्टिव से बहुत ज़्यादा इम्पॉर्टेंट है. तो आज हम बात करेंगे दैट बिकॉज दिस वॉर इज़ गोइंग ऑन और बिकॉज दिस कॉन्फ्लिक्ट हैज़ बीन गोइंग ऑन, how or what specific provisions of international law tend to be affected, whether United Nations or the International Court of Justice can interfere or can do something to mend this, the whole situation that is there at hand. So before we begin and understand what the law says, क्या violations हो रहे हैं, क्या हम कर सकते हैं from a legal perspective, let's understand कि exactly ये start क्यों हुआ और कैसे हुआ. Obviously हमको पता है कि on 7th of October, Hamas went and attacked Israel. So the Hamas area, which is in the Gaza Strip, undertook this attack very recently, and then Israel went ahead and retaliated. But इसका background क्या है ये हम quickly समझ लेते हैं. तो Israel और Palestine ये दो territories हैं जो कि highly Jewish dominated territories हैं, जिनके बीच में काफ़ी टाइम से war चल रहा है in terms of the fact that each of them want their own territories. Now Palestine wants its own territory which is dominated purely by Jews. However, Israel wants to occupy these Palestinian territories. तो अगर आप जाके इनका map देखेंगे, you will understand there is one strip where there is Israel in between, and then we have Palestine areas on right and left. The right area is the West Bank area, and the left area, which is closer to the Mediterranean Sea, is the Gaza Strip, जहाँ इस वक्त बहुत violations चल रहे हैं, and that is where the war between Israel and Hamas is going on. अब इनका हिस्ट्री जानेंगे तो हमें समझ में आएगा कि ये जो प्रॉब्लम है ये पिछले 60 years से चल रहा है, where each of them is wanting to have their own territory. In fact, UN in the 1947 had also come up with a partition plan to divide the territories between these two, but unfortunately वो किसी ने implement नहीं किया, and in the last 60 years there have been somewhere around 20 attacks that have happened where either Palestine or Israel has suffered, mostly where Palestine tends to suffer a lot because of the fact that Israel is a very strong dominated country with a huge defense force and technology. तो आगे जब हम बात करेंगे जो ये recent attack की है उसमें हमको ये better समझ आएगा, but we need to understand that this war, this conflict has been going on since ages, and there is a lot of effort that goes into resolving that to ensure there is peacekeeping. But unfortunately, there is no resolution as of yet. Now, eventually, what started happening was that if you look at the map here on the screen, you will understand even after the UN partition plan in 1947, Israel continued to occupy Palestine territories by way of military occupation. तो वो by use of force, by use of military force specifically, वो उन पे attack करते रहे, specifically the Gaza Strip and the whole strip which belongs to the West Bank. और ये attacks के बाद धीरे धीरे इज़राइल ने most of the territory अपने अंडर ले लिया है, Palestinian territory. The only territory that's remaining, as I have told you here and as you can see in the map here, is the Gaza Strip and the West Bank Strip. So अब यही conflict चल रहा है that Palestine wants this territory to itself and not be occupied by Israel, and along with that the other territories. अभी अगर हम बात करें, so Gaza has been under Israeli blockade since the last 16 years. In fact, if you see the number of attacks that have happened, Israel has launched 5 very big military assaults on Gaza, which has destroyed millions of lives, affected their education, their healthcare, their each and every system for which they are dependent on Israel and for which a country needs to go ahead and literally live on, वो सब कुछ destroy कर दिया है इजराइल ने. So each time this happens, Gaza has to go back and start again, start afresh in order to ensure that there is better living condition. But unfortunately वो हो नहीं पाता, and because of this ये जो है गाज़ा में स्पेसिफिकली बहुत इश्यूज चल रहे हैं विद रिस्पेक्ट टू एम्प्लॉयमेंट, विद रिस्पेक्ट टू सैनिटेशन, विद रिस्पेक्ट टू हेल्थ रिलेटेड फैसिलिटीज, एजुकेशन. कुछ भी पॉसिबल नहीं हो पाता इफ यू अंडरस्टैंड दैट दीज कीप हैपनिंग. द लास्ट वॉर और द लास्ट अटैक दैट इजराइल डिड ऑन गाज़ा वाज इन 2021, जिसकी बेसिस पे एक्चुअली अब हम देख रहे हैं 2023 में ये अटैक हो रहा है. नाउ लेट्स अंडरस्टैंड कि अक्टूबर 7 में जब हम बात कर रहे हैं ये क्या हुआ. सो व्हाट हैपेंड इज हमास वेंट अहेड एंड अटैक्ड अर्ली मॉर्निंग में इजराइल के टेरिटरीज को. व्हाट दे डिड वाज दे लॉन्च 5,000 rockets. Yes, you heard me right. 5,000 rockets were launched by Hamas on the Israel territory, and because of that there was utter disruption, utter chaos in the Israeli territory, where there were of course a lot of deaths. They affected the civilian population at large, and of course this happened in a very unprecedented and a very surprising manner, to which Israel at that point of time couldn't really do anything. And Hamas did this, and like I said, affected the territory, including the civilians, including taking the hostage of civilians, the military personnel who were sitting there on the bases. So ये सब Hamas ने किया on 7th of October, and they did this for continuous 20 minutes, जिसकी वजह से काफ़ी destruction हुआ इजराइल में. And of course Israel, being this country which is full of an immense defense force, full of great resources, decided not to stop. In fact, they decided to go ahead and respond. And how did they respond? They responded by way of the Operation Swords of Iron, declared war. Actually जो इजराइल के प्रेसिडेंट है उन्होंने जाके बोल दिया that we are at a war situation, and they went ahead and destroyed Gaza's supply of electricity, water, food, because Palestine, the Gaza Strip specifically, relies heavily on Israel for this. Along with that, there are around 64,000 residential units that have been destroyed, medical facilities, educational facilities, water sanitation, all of that. Though, like I have told you, the core issue is that Hamas wants an independent Palestine, and Israel wants to siege and destroy Gaza so that they can occupy this territory. अब हम बात करेंगे इंटरनेशनल लॉ पर्सपेक्टिव की कि क्या क्या वायलेशंस हो रहे हैं. सबसे पहले, इफ़ यू अंडरस्टैंड ऑन अ वेरी वेरी ह्यूमैनिटेरियन ग्राउंड, द फैक्ट दैट देयर हैव बीन मिलियंस ऑफ डेथ, especially after Israel declared a war under the Gaza territory, has been immense. We are talking about deaths of not just adults but children. Really, really young children have died in this process because, like I said, the medical units, the sanitation facilities, the water facility has been stopped for almost a week. उनके पास कोई सप्लाई नहीं है फूड, इलेक्ट्रिसिटी और वाटर का, जो कि हमारे बेसिक ह्यूमन नेसेसिटीज़ हैं. बिकॉज ऑफ दिस वी कैन अंडरस्टैंड दिस इज़ अ वॉर क्राइम सिचुएशन. Also, if we understand specifically from an international law point of view, the issue that exists is that this is obviously what Hamas did was an armed attack, was a situation of a non-international armed attack. तो अब problem ये है, at this point Gaza is not really recognized as a state. When I say state, it's not really recognized as a country under the international law regime or under the world map that we really speak about. So since Gaza is not really recognized as a territory, we cannot say that it has actually gone ahead and conducted an international armed attack. Armed attack is essentially where force is used, military necessities are involved, and they are attacked, where including civilians, where including the military bases or the defense forces are attacked. And by way of that armed attack, the idea is to capture that territory. So Hamas tried doing that, but since Hamas is not technically a recognized state, आपको अगर पता होगा, आपने बेसिक्स ऑफ इंटरनेशनल लॉ पढ़े होंगे, तो आपको पता होगा कि टू रिकॉग्नाइज अ स्टेट वी हैव टू रेफर टू आर्टिकल 1 ऑफ द मॉन्टेवीडियो कन्वेंशन, और उसमें कुछ इंपॉर्टेंट कंडीशंस दिए गए हैं, विच इज स्टेटहुड, विच इज टेरिटरी, विच इज अ फॉर्म ऑफ अ गवर्नमेंट और एंड अ पॉपुलेशन. तो यहाँ अगर आप देखेंगे, देयर इज पॉपुलेशन, there is a little bit of territory that is there, but there is no government, there is no control. Hamas has actually been recognized as a terrorist group by most of the countries. It is not really recognized as a government. तो at this moment, क्योंकि पैलेस्टीन के पास कोई government नहीं है, we cannot really consider it as a state, and since we cannot consider it as a state, we cannot say that it is an international armed conflict. So we can restrict our understanding to the fact that it is a non-international armed conflict where a terrorist or a belligerent group has gone ahead and attacked Israel. Now moving on to why way of doing this, what have they violated? They have violated the 4 Geneva Conventions and the 2 additional protocols that are attached to it. तो Geneva Conventions वो convention है जो कि specifically बनाए गए थे under the ambit of international humanitarian law and international criminal law to take care of situations of armed conflict and war crimes. तो आज इतना prominent नहीं है wars, लेकिन at a point of time the wars like situations were very prominent. In fact, we very recently saw this situation during the Russia-Ukraine war. So if we talk about such situations, तब एक बहुत important चीज़ होती है कि आपको humanitarian grounds का ध्यान रखना होता है, which is what these Geneva Conventions go ahead and talk about. This talks about how civilians have to be treated, what kind of force that can be used, how have to the territories be taken care of. So all of this is laid down in the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols. So this is what has been violated clearly by Hamas. Now let's talk about what Israel did. What Israel did, or what they're claiming to do right now by way of the war, is their act of self-defense. So self-defense is a provision that is given to every country under Article 51 of the UN Charter. तो Article 51 of UN Charter बोलता है कि अगर कोई country, if they want to go ahead and ensure that their territory is protected, only and only when there has been an attack on them, they can go ahead and retaliate in any manner that they want. But when we talk about this retaliation, when we talk about this response, or when we talk about the act of self-defense, there have to be certain conditions that have to be taken care of. First and foremost is humanity and military necessity. तो अब कोई भी अगर बात करते हैं अटैक की, it has to be keeping in mind the humanitarian grounds. But what Israel did was, Israel not just attacked the military base or the Hamas base, but went ahead and attacked the civilian population, attacked the medical facilities, water, sanitation, basic human needs जो आपकी होती हैं. Residential units have been completely destroyed. So that's what Israel did, which essentially is not really taking care of the ingredient of humanity and military necessity under the self-defense provision. The second is a distinction that has to be made between the combatants and the civilians, which has also not been really taken care of. And last is the proportionality principle. So when we talk about proportionality principle, it clearly says that self-defense का मतलब ये नहीं कि आप कुछ भी कर सकते हैं to avenge or to undertake some form of revenge. You have to take into consideration that any attack that is done as a measure of self-defense, as a measure of retaliation, it has to be done in proportion to what has been done to you. Obviously, keeping in mind the other needs, the fact that how the destruction takes place and the humanitarian grounds. ये अभी हमने बात की इंटरनेशनल लॉ वायलेशंस की. लेट्स स्पेसिफिकली टॉक अबाउट इंटरनेशनल ह्यूमैनिटेरियन लॉ वायलेशंस. क्या क्या हुए हैं? सो सबसे पहले हुआ है वॉर क्राइम. बिकॉज व्हाट इज वॉर क्राइम? इट इज़ अ डायरेक्ट अटैक ऑन सिविलियंस और एनी सिविलियन ऑब्जेक्ट्स. तो अगर आपने देखा होगा, इजराइल एंड गाजा both have had a situation where civilians have lost their lives, where they have lost their residential units, and like I spoke about the basic necessities of life. Second is, it's a crime against humanity. If you see the situation, there have been murders, there have been rapes, there have been enslavement, deportation. All of that is happening without any specific consideration to humanity. So that's another thing that has happened, and the idea of genocide is also coming close to the situation that is there in Gaza, because when we talk about genocide specifically, it essentially means to destroy or to completely erase a specific national, ethnic, or a racial or religious group. So here what Israel is trying to do is essentially destroy the Palestinian ethnic nationals so that they can occupy it. So this is also coming very close to the idea of genocide. And like I said, if you have to ever go ahead and look into these violations, you need to keep into mind certain specific principles. First is the distinction between civilians and combatants. Second is the prohibitions against those who are hors de combat, which is essentially means those specific people who have been prisoners of wars, they cannot be attacked because they have been essentially punished for the acts that they have done. Then there has to be no unnecessary infliction of suffering, which is clearly being violated here. Principle of proportionality, necessity, and humanity, all of that on both these territories, specifically in the Gaza Strip, is being attacked. तो अब हम बात करते हैं कि हम एक्चुअली फ्रॉम एन इंटरनेशनल पर्सपेक्टिव क्या कर सकते हैं. एट दिस मोमेंट United Nations is the only body that we can look into or we can look up to essentially help in peacemaking. However, as we are all aware that United Nations consists of all the member states, including the top 5 permanent members who have the right to give some form of veto, and if any of these members go ahead and give a veto, then that particular specific declaration, that policy cannot be passed. So अभी हुआ ये कि United Nations very recently met in order to understand what can be done in this situation, but unfortunately US, which is a permanent member state of the United Nations, has gone ahead and given a no confidence motion to the fact that United Nations should intervene and do something with respect to taking care of the situation that's happening in Gaza. अभी at this moment अगर आप जाके न्यूज़ देखेंगे तो आपको समझ आएगा that Gaza has obviously stopped attacking because they have no means to do so, they have no defense forces to do so, but the Israeli defense force, which is really powerful, is full of technology, is full of all the arms and ammunitions that are required, they're still continuing to destroy the Gaza territory which is there. So basically United Nations, specifically Russia, had given this proposal that United Nations should intervene to ensure that these humanitarian issues पे अगर इनको हम बचा सकते हैं तो, but US went ahead and gave a veto, and because of that now United Nations cannot really do anything. All it can do is provide some relief in the form of sanitation, food, and other facilities, which United Nations is continuing to do so. Second is the idea is Palestine wants its right to self-determination. When we talk about self-determination, which means that उनको अपना territory चाहिए, उनको चाहिए कि उनके territory में कोई intervention ना हो, sovereignty हो, integrity हो, so that they can live in the manner that they want to by having their own government, which is something which is also laid down under Article 1 of the UN Charter, that every country, every territory has the right to their own sovereignty and integrity, which is not happening here. This is the core of the reason why Hamas went ahead and attacked Israel at the first place on 7th of October. Now, Israel's saying or Israel's argument is that they have attacked by way of the self-defense provision, but clearly we can say that the ongoing attacks are a clear-cut violation of the fact that there is no principle of proportionality, necessity, or the distinction principle which is there being taken care of. So this is another issue. And last is the clear-cut problem of adherence to rule of law. यहाँ at this moment क्योंकि UN या कोई भी intervene नहीं कर पा रहा है, या other countries who are also in support or trying to take care of Gaza aren't really able to do anything, because Israel also has a lot of allies, specifically US being one of them, whereas India is considered to be having a neutral ground. But Prime Minister Narendra Modi is actually one of the first individuals or first prime ministers from our territory to visit the Palestinian territory. So there's a lot of conflict amongst the international law regime, amongst the countries as to what is the situation, what can be done. But unfortunately हमारे पास अभी ऐसा कुछ नहीं है जहाँ पे कोई पीस मेकिंग कर सके, विच इज़ द मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट कॉन्फ्लिक्ट और प्रॉब्लम ऑफ इंटरनेशनल लॉ, क्योंकि हमारे पास एक ऐसा कोर्ट नहीं है, एक ऐसा गवर्नमेंट नहीं है, एक ऐसा बॉडी नहीं है जो इन चीज़ों को टेक केयर कर सके. सो बिकॉज ऑफ दिस दीज वायलेशंस, दिस वायलेशन ऑफ रूल ऑफ लॉ, दिस वायलेशन ऑफ war of crimes that is happening will continue to happen till the time something can be done. I hope this video was helpful, and I hope you understood the international law perspective on the Israel-Palestine war, specifically the Hamas attack and the Israel's declaration of war. Please also read this whole conflict from a point of view of your current affairs, because ये आपके CLAT exam के लिए बहुत important है, which is not less than 2 months away. So I hope that you've gone through this, and I hope that you will stay tuned to us with respect to more such interesting videos. Good luck, stay tuned, bye bye.